All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the highlight of our day, our keynote speaker tonight. The man that we're going to honor with our presence this evening is someone who, if there was a Hall of Fame for ufologists, he would already be in it and holding a lifelong record of some sort, I can tell you. He started this investigating UFOs in 1958. That's when I was born. Yeah. I don't know if that should make you feel bad or me. I don't know. But so anyway, I contacted him before the conference, and I said, Stanton, would you please mail me your bio for introducing you at the conference? And so he sent it to me, and when it came in the mail, it wasn't very useful. So I'm just going to use the one off the website. Is that right? I had to do that. I had to. All right. In this field of study, it is always nice to have a nuclear physicist in your back pocket, and that's what he is. He earned his degrees in physics from the University of Chicago, been employed in the industry for 14 years, working for GE, GM, Westinghouse, Astronuclear Labs, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas Aeronautics, to name a few. He worked in such highly advanced, classified, eventually, unfortunately, canceled programs as nuclear craft, fission, and fusion rockets, and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. He's a member of the American Nuclear Society and the American Physical Society and the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And like I said, he got interested in UFOs in 1958. He's been with it ever since with a vengeance. Just one of the most prolific, diligent, detail-oriented, brilliant researchers that we have in the field, honestly. Yeah. He also possesses those two rare qualities that I talked about with Linda. Not only is he a brilliant researcher and scientist, but he's one of the best public speakers that you'll ever hear. So we've always been thankful to have him in the field and willing to share his research with us for all of these years. So he's given presentations at over 600 colleges, 100 professional groups, all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces. You didn't list a whole bunch of countries on here, but I'm sure it's all over the world as well. 19 international countries. He claims he's only had 11 hecklers in his career, and 2 of them were drunk. Now, the question I have is, were the other 11 the same guy? Was it Phil Klass all 11 times? No. But I'm going to tell you right now, don't heckle this guy. That's bringing a knife to a gunfight, I assure you. You will not win that fight. Okay, so he's written a number of books that are, some of these are considered like the cornerstone publications on this subject in the industry. He is considered the world expert and the first original investigator on the Roswell incident, which he wrote a book, Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Also, Top Secret Majestic is a book that he wrote about those subjects, which is considered one of the cornerstone books in the business as well. Let's see here. We had 1996. It had gone through 6 printings at the time already. So the book has stayed alive all these years, and it's very, very relevant information, obviously. Let's see. Okay. He was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England in 2002 by UFO Magazine. He co-authored a book with Kathleen Marden, who has spoken here a number of times, you may remember that, on the Betty and Barney Hill incident called Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. And I didn't know this. This is cool. The city of Brunswick, Canada, hang on, lost my place. New Brunswick, Canada, declared August 27th, 2007 as Stanton Friedman Day. Now, I don't know anybody who has a day dedicated to him. Do you take that day off? You should. Do you take that day off?
I was busy.
Yeah, I was going to say. Probably giving a speech, yeah.
My neighbors complained the press was filling up the street.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's the hell with them. You know, they're naming a day after you. That's fantastic. Okay, so he has a book, Flying Saucers and Science, was published in 2008. It's in its 4th reprint already. His newest book, Science Was Wrong, Startling Truths About Cures, Theories, and Inventions, They Declared Impossible. He co-wrote with Kathleen Marden, and that was published in 2010. I forgot, we do have a Hall of Fame. In 2010, he was inducted into the Roswell, New Mexico UFO Hall of Fame for his long-term, lifelong devotion to the investigation of this phenomenon. All right. So Top Secret, Majestic, and Captured, those 2 books have been optioned for movies by Stellar Productions of Hollywood, so hopefully we can see some further entertainment and information from your works there. And he has provided testimony before Congress, appeared before the UN, and pioneered many aspects of ufology, including Roswell, Majestic 12, the Betty and Barney Hill Marjorie Fish map, analysis of the Delphos, Kansas physical traces, if you go back a ways. And he has spoken at more MUFON symposium than any other living human being. And this is absolutely true. Has it been all of them since '69? Do you remember? It's been a lot. Yeah. All right. He's going to shut up and introduce me. All right. So, the loudest scientific objection to whether aliens are here or not has never really been whether aliens are real. It's always been, can they get there or get here from there? And he is going to talk about that and explain how it is feasible, even with our current technology. So join me in welcoming Stanton Friedman.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you. Now, I hope we don't get rained out tonight. Somebody told me there was a little tornado warning, maybe a little hurricane. Some way to greet a guy from New Brunswick, Canada. We don't have hurricanes, often. No, the question that I want to deal with tonight is one that has befuddled ufologists for a long, long time. Because if you're going to say some UFOs are alien spacecraft, you do have a little problem. How do you get here from there? Obviously, a balloon won't do it, and a jet aircraft won't do it. Chemical rockets like the huge Saturn V don't just about got us to the moon, but they won't get us to the stars, will they? Obviously, it's impossible. I'll take that word out of your vocabulary. What we usually mean when we say it's impossible is, gee, I don't know how to do that. That doesn't mean it's impossible, it means I'm ignorant. And the nasty, noisy negativists on the ufological scene are ignorant, usually intentionally. They know better, but they're not going to tell you. 4 basic rules for debunkers. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble and nobody will know the difference anyway. So I don't like to follow those rules because I think they're inappropriate. I worked as a scientist. I think I'm still working as a scientist. Nobody's paying me for that, but still. So tonight I want to look at some stuff that you don't usually hear. And I just read a debunking article, I can't even tell you where it was, with somebody saying, well, you can't get here from there. If you mean on a bicycle, I would agree with you. You know, it took dear old Magellan, you all remember him, before your time, but still. It took him 3 years to go around the Earth. The space station does it in an hour and a half. The basic rule here, and it applies in all kinds of areas, is technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. Think about that for a minute. Just because with this technology we can't accomplish a certain aim doesn't mean it can't be accomplished. It means you got to change technologies. And all of you have lived long enough to know that in our society, technology has been changing a great deal. If I told you that I have friends who have phones that they keep in their pocket and can talk to anybody on the planet without going home to plug them in, you'd have laughed your head off. Well, cell phones are everywhere, and you can talk to anybody on the planet. It may cost you a little bit, but still, you can get there. So, as a nuclear guy, I'm particularly sensitive to this. I like to point out a little progression. In 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster. Took a big B-29 to carry it. It released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. Wow. 1945, we had our first atomic bomb, released the energy of 15,000 tons of dynamite, not 10. 1952, first fusion device, released the energy of 10 million tons of dynamite. And the Russians set off Tsar Bomba in the early 60s. That was the name they gave it. 50 million tons of TNT. One stinking weapon. I use the adjective advisedly. But from 10 to 50 million tons. It's not by doing the same thing over and over again. It's by changing how you do things. And when we talk about going to the stars, let's forget the old and look to the new. And remember, I'm not an advertising salesman for the nuclear industry, but almost all the energy in all of our lives comes from nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in the stars. In the 1920s, everybody knew a star was a big mass of burning gas. It isn't. Sorry. It wasn't until 1938 that we figured out there were things called fission and fusion. 1938. I was born in 1934, so it isn't that long ago, long enough. Now, I mention that because we need that perspective of recognize that progress comes from doing things differently. Don't look backward, look forward. And that usually the development of new technology costs a lot of money and a lot of time. But it takes a lot of people losing money, oftentimes, to develop new technology. And a little competition, and suddenly everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got a small camera that'll fit in your pocket, you know. And we have to keep this in mind when we talk about going to the stars. Yes, they're not next door. They're close. The sun is next door, and it's a star. So I want to explore some areas of technology that most people have never heard of. I was, quote, fortunate to be involved in this industry for 14 years. Worked on more canceled programs than anybody I know. That's a dubious distinction, but it's mine. Okay, so the question is, you want to go to the stars? How do you do it? You will find out. You can read that back there, can't you? I hope. Somebody? Okay. Here's my book, Flying Saucers and Science, and I can't sell it to you because I sold all that I had, and some airline was unable to get me my luggage yesterday. Don't stand too close, you know. And I had more copies in my luggage. I sold all the ones I had here down in the sales room. But one of the books is Flying Saucers in Science because it does go into the important questions. So it's an advertising pitch, if you will, but it's important that we bring our knowledge of science and technology to attack this question, not go by old standbys from the nasty, noisy negativists. People have been telling us all the things we can't do, wrongly, mind you, for a long time. And I have a book, Flying Saucers or Science Was Wrong. 14 chapters, each one stimulated by some very smart person saying something stupid. Like you can't, great astronomer. If there's one thing I'm sure of, said Dr. Simon Newcomb, man will never travel any distance in an airplane, maybe in a balloon. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. Another great astronomer, in 1956, the British Astronomer Royal. Now, how more elite can you get than that? Space travel is utter bilge, he told Time magazine. What good would it do? Who would pay for it? What we need is better tools for astronomy. Sputnik went up in 56. We've gone to the moon. We've done a lot of other things. Couldn't be done? Well, at the time, early on, a lot of things couldn't be done that we now take for granted. So we need a certain amount of humility when we get to these questions. And the one I want to talk about tonight is star travel. Now, the first question is, so where do you want to go? And the case that gives me a measuring point is the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case in New Hampshire, 1961. They were abducted, taken on board a craft. On board the craft, Betty saw a star map. The psychiatrist who was doing the regressive hypnosis two years after this happened asked her to describe the star map, and she did. And a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish built a total of about 26 different three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood. You'll see one of them. That's quite a feat. And the last thing, people said they only did it for the publicity. The last thing a multiracial couple needed in 1961 in New Hampshire was publicity. That was not a popular notion back then. Some of you are old enough to recall that anyway. I've written 3 books with Betty's niece, Kathleen Marden. One of them is captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. And I wrote the chapter on the star map. And here's what Betty drew. Dr. Simon was clever, and he was a psychiatrist, Harvard-based, who was very careful. He hypnotized them separately. Neither one knew what the other one had said in their sessions. There were a number of sessions over a period of time. But constant instructions, if and only if you can remember it accurately. Not wild-eyed, but let's get it right. Dr. Simon didn't know anything about UFOs, but he knew a great deal about treating people who had unfortunate psychological experiences, if you will, how to bring out the truth. And you know why you needed a psychiatrist is because the emotional content as they relived a frightening, terrifying experience was enormous. And he had to stop one session each because the level of tension in them as they were reliving this experience was so great to protect their mental health. This wasn't casual parlor hypnosis. A recognized professional. His specialty, incidentally, during the Second World War was treating shell-shock war veterans. You know, your buddy's head gets blown off next to you in battle. How do you handle that? Not an easy question. So he got to be expert at dealing with that. This is the kind of man we're talking about. Not a UFO expert at all, but how to get people to break through the limits on what they could consciously recall. So the map, base stars, Betty saw it. Dr. Simon asked if she could remember it accurately. She said yes. He gave her a post-hypnotic suggestion. Draw it, if and only if you can remember it accurately. She drew it. And the obvious question is, okay, where are these stars? Which stars are they? No labels on them. We'll never know, it seemed. And a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish, there's Marjorie, she's gone now. You can see this was taken a few years ago. And Marjorie was also a sculptor, and this was a description of the aliens based on Betty's description. Very bright lady. Here's the kind of thing she did. This was her biggest model. The hard part is getting the right position for the stars. The catalogs weren't terribly accurate. She had a copy. They wouldn't let her, at the library where they had the star catalog, they wouldn't let her take out the catalog. She had to copy out all hand numbers by hand, all the catalog numbers. 2 angles, but the hard part is the distance. And we didn't have good data because we didn't have the measuring tools we have today. So this particular model had 256 stars in it. So you can imagine how much tedious work went into this. You got to find the coordinates, then you got to hang them on strings. A lot of work. I was asked to talk to Marjorie by the head of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. She wanted to talk to a scientist. She was a 3rd grade school teacher, a member of Mensa, a very bright lady. And Coral called me, Coral Lorenzen, and I traveled a great deal then. I'm cutting back on that now. You may have heard I'm retiring, sort of, soon, sort of. And I visited Marjorie. I was speaking in Toledo, Ohio. And I had one of her little models. She built more than 20 of them. And the idea was to see if she could find a 3-dimensional pattern that matched the 2-dimensional drawing that Marjorie had made. And she did eventually find, after more than 20 models had been built, find one pattern that matched angle for angle, line length for line length, what Betty had drawn. In case you're wondering, the sun is up here. The base stars are down here. Several special things. All the stars in the pattern were the right kind for planets and life. And at that time, we didn't have good data on planets anyplace other than here. As a matter of fact, the popular view was, well, aren't we lucky? We live on a planet that's got air and water, and the only solar system in the neighborhood? Wow. Well, we've learned a little since then. It turns out the latest numbers, which weren't available to Marjorie, are that on the average there are 1.6 planets per star. Now, what does that mean? Well, our galaxy, the Milky Way, we used to think there was only one galaxy. We used to think there was only one solar system. We grew up and maybe there's one galaxy. Now we know there are billions and billions of galaxies, to quote Carl Sagan. He and I were classmates at the University of Chicago. I try not to say billions and billions, but lots and lots of stars. And now we know lots and lots of planets. Think about that. There are approximately 10,000 stars within a mere 100 light years of here. That means there are about 16,000 planets within 100 light years. The galaxy is thousands of light years across. Those darn planets are everywhere. And I'm not saying they're all suitable for life. Maybe only 10%. That's only 1,600 planets within 100 light years. So it's one thing that's changed drastically, our concept of, so how much is out there? You mean we're not so special? Yeah, I mean we're not so special. Because there's another thing. Bishop Ussher, in about 1650, was a sex expert. He looked through the Bible for all the begatting going on. And he concluded that if you trace back on the begatting, that the world was created in 4004 BC. Well, we now know that he was only off, he left out 6 zeros. It was over 4 billion for BC. So it wasn't just yesterday, or our grandfather's days, or great-great-grandfather. It was a heck of a long time ago. And there's still people today who say, we're the only life in the universe. God forbid that should be true. If this is the best God could do, we should forget that God. Well, clearly, we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. I mean, look around. The military budget this year on planet Earth is $1 trillion. There are no starving kids who need feeding? Or we can't afford to feed them because we've got to buy more weapons. That's crazy. We have no reason to think we're on the top of the heap. So to get back to the star map, we have names for the stars. It's a little out of date. The sun is up here, as I said. The base stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. That's the constellation of Reticulum. The net, that means, in case you're wondering. And those numbers on there are light years, the distances. 36.6 light years, 14 light years, 9.8, etc. Just a local neighborhood. So this is our neighborhood. And it turns out all of the stars are in a plane. And you say, who cares? Well, it turns out that makes travel a lot easier. All the planets in the solar system, for example, are in a plane. So it's easier to travel within that plane than to go out to someplace over there and over there instead of all in the same plane. So that's where we stood. Now, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, now we know we say 36.6. Now it's 39.3 light years, just down the street. Now, we all learned in school that the nearest star to the sun is 4.3 light years away, like Alpha Centauri. Does that mean everybody has got to go that far to get to another star? No way, Jose. There are loads of stars that have other stars less than a light year apart from them. And I think it's not unreasonable to say the closer your neighbor, the more likely you are to try to find out about him. Is he going to attack me? Can I attack him? Can I steal his goodies? Well, how do we Earthlings act? Shoot first, ask questions later? Steal if you can, buy if you can't? Go get them, that's the idea. So anyway, in our little local neighborhood, within 100 light years, there are 10,000 stars and approximately 16,000 planets. Maybe there's only a few hundred or a few thousand that have life. But remember, I'll bet fewer than 10% of you had your ancestors living here in Arkansas more than 200 years ago. How'd you get here? Migration, colonization, banishment. We're not indigenous to here. How many of you had your families living in Arkansas more than 150 years ago? One? Oh, maybe two. Okay, 3. You get the idea. Where people are today is a result of other activities some time back. It doesn't mean they are indigenous to wherever they're living now. Look, I live in Canada. I grew up in New Jersey. Was that for Canada or New Jersey? Canada, okay. I'm a dual citizen, you see. I can complain about both governments. And sometimes do. My wife's only Canadian, so we have a mixed family, if you will. Okay. Now, the reason for showing you this is the point that I'm trying to get across is there are lots of stars not too far away. We're not talking, most of the stories, articles I've seen about aliens talk about the nearest civilization would have to be 1,000 light years away. That's nonsense. Total nonsense. I mean, I haven't been out there, so I can't personally say that that's not so, but we know that there are stars a lot closer, and lots of them. Okay, now, that raises the question of how do you get here? And one of the peculiarities of my background is I worked on more canceled government-sponsored advanced research and development programs than anybody that I know of anyway. Maybe the other ones were classified, I don't know. Mine were classified too, but not super classified. And you might wonder, what is that monster? Well, there's a nuclear reactor inside this cylinder, and there are two jet engines down here, and this is mounted on a railroad car because when it's operating, you don't want to be close. You want to remotely move the car. This is for a nuclear-powered aircraft. We never built one, but it wasn't a small program. In 1958, General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion spent $100 million. And that was a lot of money in 1958. To me, it's a lot of money now, but still, you get the idea. And they employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. We're not talking about a dozen professors sitting around with a bunch of grad students. It was a big program. It was fun to work on. I enjoyed it while it lasted. I thought I'd spent all my life working for GE. My father worked for the same company for 37 years. Well, GE's got all kinds of nuclear divisions. After 3 years, I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I got out before the program was canceled. But big effort. This was tested out at the Nevada test site. They don't gamble. That's not only a gambling place. There's a nuclear test site. They explode nuclear weapons out there and do other nefarious things, operating systems like this. Now, that's what a flight version would look like. With the reactor inside, that cylinder in the middle, the jet engines down the bottom. Pretty neat. It seemed like, and it was exciting when I worked on the program. All programs that get canceled are exciting before they're canceled. Now, here's another model, if you will. Fuel elements. You got a little problem. You're cooling the fuel, uranium-based fuel, with air. So it's got to be able to get through the reactor. That means neutrons and gamma rays can get through too and get out. So you got two counterproductive things going on. The air has to go through and go out, and you don't want the radiation to get out. That's a great challenge. Here's another version. These are big and expensive systems, incidentally. Again, this is not what you build with 3 grad assistants. Summer students, of course. Then we had a nuclear ramjet. The idea was you'd carry this aloft in a big B-52 airplane, drop it, light the ramjet, and then you'd pick a target, and you'd release it at the right time so you could hit your target with a nuclear weapon. We're good at that. We specialize in that. This program lasted in the 60s as well. Here's what a real one would look like. Then we get to the nuclear rockets program. Spent 3 years on that for Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab. The guy in the middle gives you an idea of how big these things are. And there were 3 different companies involved. I worked for Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab. There was Aerojet General in Sacramento. We were in Pittsburgh. And then Los Alamos built the Phoebus reactor. Power level was interesting. Ours was 1,100 megawatts, and I'll go into that in just a minute. Aerojet's was 1,000 megawatts, and Los Alamos tested one that was 4,000 megawatts. The power of Hoover Dam is 2,000 megawatts. So we're talking about something less than this big in diameter. These are real. The happiest day in industry was when we heard the broadcast to our limited group in Pittsburgh of the test out at the Nevada test site. We had no idea how long the thing would operate for. Nobody had ever done this before. Liquid hydrogen coming in, 4,000 degree hydrogen coming out. That's pretty darn hot. And they announced that 5 minutes, temperatures and pressures nominal, 10 minutes, hey, it's working. 20 minutes, the maximum we could go was 60 minutes because that's how much liquid hydrogen we could store. We went to full 60 minutes. And boy, were we happy. Half the people thought it would, the fuel almost would go out the nozzle after 5 minutes. Now, our reward, after all 3 programs were successful in 1969, the program was canceled. Oh, well, we can do it. Goodbye. Got a shock of my life. I managed to get another job. Had a family to take care of and stuff. They canceled the program, so I was out of a job. And I got a job with McDonnell Douglas Astronautics in California, Santa Monica. And I was in heaven. My job would be to figure out how flying saucers worked in the atmosphere. Wow! What an opportunity. I'm driving across the country and I hear on the radio from Pittsburgh to California, the program which supported my work was canceled. I get out there, how'd you like to be greeted at the desk? You give them your offer letter and all this stuff. You realize we just laid off 5,000 people. How's that for a greeting, you know? They kept me for 3 months. And you might be interested in knowing that I did do a study on magnetoaerodynamics, a literature search, government-sponsored stuff. Got 900 references. 90% were classified. Somebody was doing some work on magnetoelectric, electrodynamic, whatever you want to call it, systems. We haven't seen much of that since. Maybe somebody here knows what happened after that, but they ain't talking. So we successfully operated these back before 1970. And it's as if the program didn't exist. You find the noisy negativists talking about coming from other stars. They never talk about nuclear. It's not a dream. We built the things. We tested them. And I was particularly happy when ours worked, because less than 2 weeks before the test, they came to me and said, Stan, we're not very certain about the heating rates and the control rods in our system. Can you get some information so we can be a little more confident that they'll work? Okay, we got some experiments done. We had a special facility, came back and said, yes, it'll work. But I realized before we started the test, if this thing fails, they may blame me. That was an uncomfortable feeling, so I was very glad when it worked. Wow. Then they canceled the program. Okay. But the point is, these things are real. And we're talking about powerful systems. 4,000 megawatts is a lot of energy in something this big. Think of Hoover Dam. Produces 2,000 megawatts of electricity. Okay, so our first place we look is nuclear systems. And you may say, well, is anybody building any nuclear-powered systems? Sure, the United States Navy. Some of you may have heard of Admiral Hyman Rickover. They hated his guts. But we have nuclear submarines that in World War II could stay underwater for 24 hours. Nuclear-powered, 1956, go around the world underwater. They have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, big old monsters. Would you believe they can operate for 18 years without being refueled? They carry about 75 little airplanes. They can operate for what, 2 hours without refueling? And I think we owe the nuclear navy and Admiral Rickover an award. Because I think the reason we've had peace is the crazy doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Nobody knew where the submarines were. The Russians didn't know where our nuclear submarines were. They had nuclear-tipped missiles on them. So even if they sent ICBMs to attack the United States, we could retaliate because there was no way to get at those submarines under the water there. Well, I guess we better not do that, guys. And it was the same in reverse. If we attack them, they'll be able to retaliate with their nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. I know it sounds crazy, but it worked. And I'm still impressed with 18 years for an aircraft carrier, which is a huge monster, without refueling. That's real world. It's not theoretical. Wouldn't it be nice if we could, but we can't, so we won't. That's the way it is. Now, the real exciting, well, here's what a nuclear rocket reactor propulsion system looks like. The red means it's hot on the inside. 4,000 degree exhaust temperature. Jet engines, maybe 2,500 degrees. So these things are monsters, hot monsters. Here's what ours look like. The reactor is right in there. This is out at the nuclear test site. Again, mounted on a railroad car so you could move it remotely because it gets pretty darn hot, radioactive after operating. This is what a flight type system looks like. Test facility. You can see the reactor over on the right-hand side down below here. This is out in the middle of nowhere if you've ever been out at the Nevada test site. You ain't no people around there. You don't want them around when you're testing these things, or the nuclear weapons across behind the hills there. But fortunately, there's a lot of land there that's not used for people, pretty much. Powerful-looking beastie. And you can see the mountains in the background. Area 51 is out past those mountains. I should say that softly, Area 51, you know. There's the Los Alamos one, the Phoebus one. Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory. I show you this stuff because a lot of people think if you talk about this, it's just theoretical. You know, some guy's doing a paper study. This is hardware. It got built, it got operated, got tested. And the program got canceled. That's the key thing, I guess. Those are tanks of liquid hydrogen down below. And Area 51, as I say, is on the other side of the mountains there. That's liquid hydrogen going up. Hot. Very hot. 4,000 degrees. Quite remarkable. Facility is there. Not that you want to play around out there. Okay, now we get to the heart of the matter, nuclear fusion. Now, fusion is the most important source of energy in all our lives. Why do I say that? Because the sun is our fusion factory. All the stars produce their energy by nuclear fusion. You go back to the 1920s, and everybody knows a star is a mass of burning gas. Then we discovered in 1938 fission and fusion. Same year, it just so happens. Now, what's the big deal about fusion? That's H-bombs as well, if you want to think in those terms. But that's what we Earthlings are good at, destructive systems. You want a bigger bang for the buck, that's what it is. And fusion will do it. And usually most of our big bombs, H-bombs, are fission fusion devices. You get it started with a little fission bomb. Then you throw in, fusion uses hydrogen and helium, which happen to be the two lightest and most abundant gases in the universe. Everywhere you go, you won't find uranium, but you will find hydrogen and helium. And if you put them together right and be smart, you'll get energy, lots and lots of energy. And the key thing is, you can use that energy for propulsion as well. Believe it or not, there's something better than killing people. We don't think of that very often. Killing is okay, more energy, who needs that? But nuclear fusion, I'm not saying we won't discover something better, but we do know that all the stars out there are fusioning. That's what's going on. And the amount of energy per pound of stuff is so much greater. Think about that. We talk about the power level of these things, a 10-ton bomb in World War II, and we're talking about 50 million tons of TNT, and the biggest one the Russians tested. That's an enormous jump. And it's enough to scare me. I don't know about you, but I don't want anybody having their mitts on something that can release that kind of energy. But for propulsion, okay, let's have a fusioning device. And the nice thing is hydrogen and helium all over the place. That's kind of convenient. So I stress that because if I want to go to the stars, I want a system where I can take it off from Earth and get out to the stars. And somebody says, now wait a minute, Stan, are you forgetting Einstein said the fastest you can go is the speed of light? Look how long it would take you to get to the speed of light. Well, not very. At 1g acceleration, the force of gravity acting here, if I were to drop this, it would accelerate at 1g, 32 feet per second per second. Nominal, 1g. Astronauts can handle routinely 5, for short periods of time, 13 g's. That's a heck of a jolt. You don't want to handle that if you can help it. You got to be properly constrained and, all the rest of that. So how long does it take at 1g to get to the speed of light? Well, I've asked audiences of engineers and scientists. Multiple choice question, 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, or 1? How many think it's 1,000? I go down the line. The answer is 1 year. Little under a year at 1g will get you from 0 to the speed of light. Now, people want half an Einstein. He said the speed of light's the limit. That's a complicated question and so forth. But the other half of that is Einstein also said, and has been verified experimentally, as you get close to the speed of light, time slows down for things moving that fast. What does that mean? You go out, come back, marry your granddaughter's best friend. You haven't aged. The family has, I am not advocating that for anybody. But That's very important. And you say, well, wait a minute, Stan, we don't do anything at close to the speed of light, do we? Sure. That big accelerator in CERN accelerates particles to 99.9999% of the speed of light. We're doing that. It's a big old monster. But that gives you the idea that when people start talking about how long it takes to get someplace, they're not making sense. They haven't looked at the appropriate technology. And as I say, I'm not saying we won't find something better or faster. What I'm saying is we know we're ready, and we built, in case you're wondering, the United States has tested 2,000 nuclear warheads. Not 10, not 20, not 100, 2,000. And so one reason I would suggest for aliens to come here is we have demonstrated nuclear fusion many times. That means we can bother them. And you figure our track record is not exactly one to be proud of. World War II, we killed 50 million of our own kind. We destroyed 1,700 cities. Now, if you were an alien, would you want us out there? And we've exploded 2,000 nuclear warheads. We're not nice guys. You wonder where your tax money is going? Now you know. Bam. Bam with a bomb. Boom with a bomb. So it's important that we recognize we're not talking about a futuristic world of hundreds or thousands of years from now when we figure out how to produce a lot of energy for a propulsion system. We know how to do it now. I was involved in the study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel at Aerojet General Nucleonics, Air Force contract, $9 million. Our conclusion was, if you got the dough, you can go. Lots of dough, as it happens. So this is not science fiction that I'm talking about here. Because we haven't done it yet, you can't hop a ride on a nuclear fusion device, propulsion system. But if you were an alien, wouldn't you worry about the idiots on this planet? Remember, it's not only one country that has these things. What are there? I had lost count. 8 or 9 countries that have nuclear weapons? So, can you get to the stars? Sure. Is it easy? No. Okay, Magellan took a very slow ship around the world and took 3 years. Big old ship. Not as big as an aircraft carrier, but still, good size. But we know how to do some very explosive things, if you will. And it's important to look at us how the aliens must look at us. Nuclear weapons here, nuclear weapons there, nuclear weapons there, a new one here. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in people like that leader of North Korea. I shouldn't say this here, I guess, but I don't have a lot of faith in our leader in this country. I mean, when you start threatening the nuclear option, that's madness. Like it's 2 kids on a playground. My father will beat up your father. Isn't that what kids used to say? That's absurd. So, the stars aren't easy. But you realize, and today somebody was telling me one of these little thumb drives, good ones, umpteen gigabytes. And it was a few megabytes 40 years ago. That's an enormous jump. You take for granted today things that would have been thought to be totally science fiction 50 years ago. 50 years is not very long when you got a 4 billion year system here. And the universe may be only 13 billion years. Only 13 billion years. And look at the rate of progress. Well, progress in quotes here. But so there are many reports of UFO sightings near nuclear facilities. And you can understand why. They have every right to be concerned about this because we are a threat to them, not just to ourselves. And those two are inseparable. As long as we keep building bigger and better weapons, and more countries have them, I don't know what the latest number is, 8, 9 countries. It's scary. I have a great-grandson. What's the world going to be like when he grows up? So, to the stars is not a theoretical question. It's a practical question. And obviously, if we, after less than 120 years of technological development, can talk about going to the stars, how about somebody who got started a little bit before we did? 10,000 years? 10 million years? Remember, the Earth is 4 billion years old. And how many times have we gotten there and been battered by somebody else or ourselves with nuclear weapons? That's not a trivial question. We have demonstrated an inability to keep from resorting to weapons of mass destruction. Talk to somebody who survived in England during the Second World War. It wasn't fun. It was my first thought when I went over there back in the 60s. My God, how did they put up with it? How much bombing there was. Can you imagine 300 bombers flying in formation over Europe and dropping bombs along the way? We did that. Bombs don't just make holes in the ground. They knock down buildings and they kill people. And we used them in great quantities. Some people got rich making bombs. I'm not against capitalism, but I am for humanism. I'm for mankind, womankind, peoplekind. Okay, here's nuclear fusion, just to give you a little better handle on that. Don't be scared by equations. He is helium, helium-3, and D is heavy hydrogen, deuterium. And the key number here, each of these fusion reactions produces 18.3 million electron volts in charged particles. Is that a lot? Normal reactions, chemical reactions, produce 10 electron volts. Not 10 million, 10. So one fusion reaction, 18 million electron volts. Now these reactions, only 2.4 million electron volts. This reaction, 3.5 million electron volts. So we're talking an enormous escalation when you go to fusion. I mean, fusion is the way to go if you want to destroy it. Probably the way to go if you want to travel long distances in short periods of time. But it's something we already know something about. As I said, we've tested 2,000 nuclear warheads on this planet. That's a lot. I'm thinking of my great-grandson when I say that. And some of you must have great-grandchildren, or at least grandchildren. So, fusion is the big source of energy in the universe, as far as we know. And it's big enough to take care of all our concerns. The fireball for one of our big nuclear warheads was 3 miles. Can you imagine one explosion with a 3-mile wide fireball? This is the real world. This is not imaginary. Friedman didn't make this up to scare you. It's the way it is. I'm not proud as a nuclear physicist that we have built nuclear weapons. But I'm saying we need to be realistic to be aware of what their damage can be. And that's our kids and grandchildren and great-grandchildren we're talking about. And not just here. The whole planet. Now, one of the other objections to reality is governments can't keep secrets, Stan. What are you kidding? They leak like sieves. Really? Well, this is one of a number of documents I got under Freedom of Information. I think there are, 8 words you can read there. Of course governments can keep secrets. First they wouldn't give us anything, then they said, well, okay, we'll give you that. And then we went to, this is CIA, but we went to the NSA, National Security Agency, never says anything. NSA, no such agency, there's another thought. The NSA released 156 top secret Umbra classified documents. Wow. You could read 1 sentence per page. Everything else was whited out. That's perfectly legal. And that was years ago. Who knows how much more since? We went after the CIA also years ago. What was it, 800 pages up through secret. And eventually got released. It's almost all blacked out. Perfectly legal. But if anybody tells you the government can't keep secrets, they're wrong. Most of the people you're keeping secrets from are other government people, your own government. The need-to-know concept. It isn't enough to have a security clearance, you have to have a need-to-know for that. Not many of us do. Very frustrating when you get a blacked out or whited out document. And then somebody tells you, well, they can't keep secrets. Fine, give me the declassified version of this with all the stuff so you can read it. Do I know what's under there? No, of course I don't. I don't have a clearance or a need to know for that. I'm sure some of you have had security clearances. You know what I'm talking about. Oh, that's one of the NSA documents. Isn't that exciting? Now, believe it or not, that's called jumbo. They were so worried about the first nuclear test that we spent a lot of money to make heavily enriched uranium. And if the bomb was a dud, we'd lose all that. So they decided to test the first one inside this huge steel cylinder. Walls are a foot thick. And then cooler heads prevailed, and they tested it. They hung jumbo outside. The test was separate from jumbo, but that was moved, incidentally, from Ohio to New Mexico, or Nevada, really, to the area outside of Area 51. Now, this doesn't answer the question. Okay, you can get here from the star stand, but how do you move around this way, this way, this way, up, down, back, forth, right-angle turns? I would suggest an electromagnetic system, magneto-aerodynamic. Believe it or not, that's the electromagnetic submarine. It was built and operated. Electric and magnetic fields at right angles to each other, everybody learns this in their college physics course, produce a force at right angles to both. You push against the surrounding media, it pushes back by Newton's laws, and away you go. An electromagnetic submarine. You see, seawater is an electrically conducting fluid. You can ionize the air and make it electrically conducting. You all know that when a meteor comes in, it glows because it's hot. And radio signals can't get through that plasma. It's a whole other world out there. And EMS-1, Electromagnetic Submarine 1, Westinghouse Research Lab professor Stuart Wade built this with some graduate students. And it worked. And that was the end of that. Well, we think so. I won't guarantee that. That's Stuart in the middle. How'd you like to have a job? What's your job? Well, I swim around alongside an electromagnetic submarine. There are papers that have been published. The advantage of having electrically conducting fluid, ionized air, around a craft in the atmosphere is you can control lift, drag, heating, sonic boom production, radar profile. Those are all very nice things to be able to control for a subject moving through the atmosphere. I'm not saying it's going to replace airplanes right away. Nuclear submarine. I love the artwork on that. That's an electromagnetic aircraft carrier. And I'm still impressed with being able to operate for 18 years without refueling. Oh, how much acceleration can you stand? The answer, as with so many technical questions, is it depends. And one of the ways in which it depends is the duration of the acceleration. A trained pilot can perform a tracking task while being accelerated at 14 Gs for 2 minutes. If you reduce the Gs, you can stand it for longer. And it depends on the direction. Did you ever notice how the astronauts go up on their back? That's because you can stand more Gs back to front than foot to head. The joints aren't really designed for handling a lot of acceleration. So there are a lot of factors to take into account. This is measured data. That's not Friedman data. Another device, when we go with deep space probes, how do you provide energy to the radio and all the other systems? I mean, hardly burning gas. And you do it with a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. I think I have a picture of it. Yeah. It's about this big. Radioactive plutonium. And there's a law in physics, if you heat one side of something and there's a temperature difference between it and someplace else, there's a current that flows. So when we went past Pluto with the Horizon spacecraft, now Pluto is way the heck out there. And maybe it isn't a planet, maybe it is, maybe it's a small planet, it doesn't matter. But it took 9 years to get there, I think. So how do you provide power? The further away you get from the sun, the lower the sun level is. So how do you get around that? You use a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. No moving parts. And all our deep space probes use them. Nobody talks about them, but they use them. They're not classified as such. I mean, you can't buy plutonium on the open market either. But this uses plutonium-238, which is not used in atom bombs. 239 is another story. The nuclear world's a crazy world. But we've launched dozens of these things. It solves a problem. How do you produce power for a long time in a lightweight system that operates without moving parts, without needing attention? Nobody along, no mechanic to fix things as you go out there. These are real. These are not Friedman's imagination here. Okay. I hope we'll have time for questions. I didn't look to check how much time I've been taking here. Probably too much, but that's all right. This is Top Secret Magic, MAJIC. That's my story about Majestic 12. And it's not something you hear about. As far as I'm concerned, under President Truman, after the early fuss about flying saucers, and after the first atomic bombs, an organization was set up to deal with the important cases in secret. And it was called Operation Majestic 12 or MJ12. Undoubtedly, the name was changed when the thing went public, when we got a document in the mail, roll of film in the mail, top secret document. And I wrote the whole book on Majestic 12, and I'm convinced that there was a Majestic 12. I'm also convinced most of the documents that came out, was a flood of documents, that most of them were phony. And I talked to somebody who used to work for the CIA, and I said, don't you think that government intelligence agencies can create documents that are phony? And he looked at me, of course. Don't you think so? And he's right, of course they can. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. So you put out phony documents. I mean, I can see the Air Force intelligence guys in classes. Okay, guys, we need, your assignment for the next week is come up with 3 classified-looking documents. And they got to pass muster now with our board of experts over here, you know. So it seems perfectly rational to me. And of course, they would change the name once it got out. Standard practice. And I would quote from an Air Force document by an Air Force General, Carol Bolender. He put out this memo after the University of Colorado. You remember the Condon Committee? I hope you remember it. Long shall it live in whatever the bad word is, disrepute. General Bolender wrote a memo. He was asked, what should we do about Project Blue Book? And he said, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP, Joint Army-Navy Air Force Publication 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. What did he say? But we were always told Blue Book was it, from the early 50s to 1969. You don't mean they lied to us, Stan? Well, later on in the memo, if we close Project Blue Book, the public won't have a place to report UFO sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for those purposes. What? What was all that about? What were those procedures? Why didn't we hear about them? Because we didn't want anybody to know. So I decided I better call General Bolender. He was a brigadier general, and he was an engineer on the lunar excursion module. You may recall that there was a period when we were desperate to get ahead of the Russians, because they put up the first satellite, they put up the first man, they put up the first woman. We were playing second fiddle on the world stage. We got to get to the moon. So he was the engineer on that. So I called General Bolender and I said, I gave him, I had had a clearance for 14 years and nuclear guy and all this stuff. And I said, it sounded to me, I was very impressed with your memo, I said. It sounded to me like you were saying that there are 2 separate communication channels. One for reports which could affect national security, and I told him I'd had a call a few weeks before about somebody talking about a saucer going down the runway to SAC base where nuclear weapons were stored. That's a national security consideration. Ain't supposed to be nobody there who doesn't belong there, you know. And on the other hand, if my wife and I are driving along and see a flying saucer, big deal, happens all the time. He agreed. 2 separate communication channels. You don't hear people talking about the Bollinger memo. He's dead now. You can't interview him. Can't bring him to the conference. But those are very important statements. Reports which could affect national security, they're the only kind that matter, aren't they? Are not part of the Blue Book system. All these years, 52, a little earlier to 69. Blue Book, that's it. Now, we just found out from the New York Times and Washington Post, toward the end of December, that there'd been a secret effort that had went on for, 7 years? Spent $22 million looking into UFOs. They didn't name Majestic 12, that's for sure. The reports had to go someplace, and you didn't need Army, Navy, Air Force groups, one group to look at the best data. I mean, you and I don't have the equipment to get that good data. A high-performance aircraft able to chase the UFOs and make measurements, radio signature and all kinds of how the color changes with speed and all that sort of stuff. Only governments have those. Radar installations all over the place, space surveillance, all that sort of stuff. Those are government functions. So one group will do it, and you funnel good data into that group. Secretly, top secretly, if I can make up a word. So there are always surprises when you look at the UFO stuff. A lot of surprises. And I'd say I'd sell you all these books, but I don't have any of them with me because my luggage didn't get delivered. It's a big green, maybe that's the problem. It was green, my suitcase, but it didn't make it here. I took 4 flights yesterday to get here. I don't know how many of my luggage took, but it sure didn't take the last one to get here. Oh, there's a book about in 1952, over 200 fatal crashes of our military airplanes. 200, including pilots who had had over 100 hours of flight combat. Somebody was making sure our guys were given a hard time. I don't even have any copies of that here. There we are, back to that again. Let me summarize here. Travel to the stars? Yes. Can I put you on a plane tomorrow? No. But all the new developments started on a low level, and when we decided to spend the dough, away we went. That first facility to enrich uranium was a mile long, built in secret. While it was in operation for a year, it was using 5% of all the electrical power produced in the United States, in secret, for a whole year. Can we keep secrets? You're darn right. How many others we've kept that we don't know about? I don't know. Nobody does. Because we don't have the need to know, you don't know. Very simple. And I'll tell you, I once had to be a courier for my own slides they weren't ready when they were supposed to be, going to a conference to give a classified talk. They sat me down and scared the heck out of me. These slides go with you, not in the trunk of your car. They go with you. If your plane crashes, we don't care about you, we care about your classified material. That makes you happy to hear that, doesn't it? Leave them. Get the slides. You know, security is taken seriously when you've sworn an oath to uphold it, and you know that the penalties are very strong if you don't. I wonder how many Americans know that executed a woman, Ethel Rosenberg, for violating security. She was a spy. Executed. Not put her in prison on parole or whatever. Executed. She wasn't the only one executed, but we show mercy? No. Do what needs to be done. So I'm hoping my green suitcase will show up so that I will have some more books tomorrow. I'm out of them now, and I'm sorry, I apologize, but I didn't know United was going to lose my luggage. Maybe it's a Soviet plot. Thank you very much for listening. I guess we have time for questions. I don't run the clock here. Can we have the lights up? I'm sure somebody has a question. Yeah, there we go. Not everybody's asleep. Good. Good. Any questions from the floor?
Mr. Friedman.
Yes.
This is the first time I've been here, but I often wonder when objects come into our atmosphere, there's usually a sonic boom, or they get very hot and melt. So I'm wondering, there must be technology if we have visitors coming in. Visitors coming in, how do they keep their craft from heating up, melting, and making a sonic boom so everybody looks up?
They create a plasma around the craft. That's why I mentioned that. You can control sonic boom production, heating, radar profile, drag. Those are all important for flight.
I understand. Thank you very much. And they didn't have that technology for the SST, or we'd have had going across the United States. It's just over the seas, right?
Yeah, it's complicated, it's not cheap, and it's kind of heavy for an SST. We can't afford to wait.
Thank you.
Yes?
What do you think about low-energy nuclear reactions, or what's normally known as cold fusion?
What do I think about low-energy nuclear, LENR, low-energy nuclear reactions, cold fusion? I'm very intrigued with cold fusion. There are a couple of books, and there has been some progress made on showing that it can be used to create energy. Are we doing much? Not that I know of.
There's a great website, lenr.com. Got all kinds of companies are working on it.
Well, I'm not saying they're not working on it. I'm saying we haven't published the open literature of what the heck is going on now. When we know how to do it, maybe.
Well, there's a lot of private companies that are published quite a bit.
Well, okay, but we're not. I think it's part of the wave of the future, and I would rather see LENR than fusion devices myself.
Yeah.
But who knows how things will go? Depends on who's running the show.
One question.
Yes.
Have you personally seen starcraft or flying saucers? And how many of you have?
Okay, I have never seen a flying saucer or an alien. I never saw a neutron either. I think they're real too. Or a gamma ray even. And let me ask the question now. I used to do this at the end of all my lectures. How many people here believe that they have seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer, an intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft? Let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, about 55 or 60.
And I've seen 8 of them.
You've seen 8 of them. An octet of flying saucers. Look, you don't see if you don't look. And where I live, it's cold at night in the wintertime, which is half the year anyway. And we have big trees. So if I go out, I don't see much of the sky. There are other people who spend a lot of time looking at the sky, and they do see saucers. Give them half a chance. So remember, the question isn't, are all UFOs alien spacecraft? The question is, are any? And my answer is very definitely yes. Now, I should have asked all of those who raised their hands as having seen one, how many of you reported what you saw? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. About 25. That's a higher percentage than usual. Not surprising at a UFO conference. You're much more likely to be here if you're a member of MUFON or someplace that you can report a sighting to. Yes?
Mr. Friedman, I was wondering, with the advent of private industry getting involved with space travel more and more, such as SpaceX, have you or others considered taking these projects that were shut down as far as alternative power for propulsion to these private companies, since our government seems to not want to use them, or at least not telling us that they're using them?
Have I seen given any thought to doing that? No. I worked too long in industry to know how much it costs. Ain't cheap. And the reason you get funding is because somebody wants to accomplish a certain objective. We demonstrated that you can build fission nuclear power plants for space propulsion. We tested them on the ground. That's nice, we can do it. Cancel the programs, and that was the end of that. You need a project, you need a goal. If your goal is to get a man to the moon, and remember, that was a political goal. It took one heck of a lot of good engineering. Don't misunderstand me, I'm not putting down our lunar program. But we spent a heck of a lot of money because we had a goal. What did President Kennedy say? A man to the moon and back by the end of the decade? I remember that. And I remember how enthusiastic. Wow, that's exciting. People bought into it. And as soon as you buy into it, then you can have things go wrong a little bit along the way, and it's okay. You shall overcome. Famous line. So I think we can overcome, but you have to decide you want to do it because it costs money. That's why I mentioned when I was working on nuclear airplanes. 1 year budget in '58 for General Electric was $100 million. 3,400 employees, 1,100 of whom were engineers and scientists. That's not a small program. It's a major program. And do our elected officials want to spend that kind of money? To do what? Hey, aliens, look at us. I don't think we'd impress the aliens. We'd scare them. I think everybody else in the neighborhood is worried about Earthlings taking their brand of friendship, hostility out there. Wouldn't you be? Yeah.
What do you think of the plausibility of the secret space program? And a corollary, just as you said, funding is certainly very important. But the day before 9/11, Don Rumsfeld was testifying before Congress, and he was admitting that he couldn't account for more than $1 trillion of the military budget. So that's a fair amount of money.
That's a fair amount of money, yes. I don't know what was accomplished with that. Maybe he was just a bad accountant.
A lot of toilet seats.
Or what?
A lot of toilet seats.
A lot of toilet seats, yes. Yeah, you raise a very important question. How accountable is the government for its expenditures? What do we do about black budgets? You can't advertise. Oh, this week we're going to talk about our black budgets for this, that, or the other thing. We're going to tell the Russians exactly what we're doing. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. They listen to television and the internet. What else do they listen to? I don't know. So I'm not saying there can't be a secret space program. I've seen no evidence that there is a powerful, well-motivated, well-designed, and what is its goal? Maybe we're sending a message to the aliens. Hey guys, we're ready for you. I don't know. I don't speak for the government. You may have noticed that. Yes?
In regards to how much energy is produced, can you kind of give me a simple explanation of
I can't understand you. Would you?
How do the magnetic systems, propulsion systems, compare to the nuclear propulsion as far as how much energy is produced? Can you give me a simple comparison of them?
Well, the electromagnetic systems I'm talking about, I was very surprised when I did a literature search using one key word, magnetoaerodynamics, and got 600 references, 90% of which were classified. That was at the end of the 60s. Who was doing that work and where and why? So I don't know. But I still haven't seen, usually companies like to publicize their achievements so they can get more funding. And I still haven't seen any follow-up to that. So I admit readily, I don't know what all classified work the government is doing. And if there's anybody here, I'm sure he's not going to tell us. Because that's not how the rules of the game work. I do know how to play the game. And, you know, you can't tell your kids what you're doing on the classified work. I enjoyed my jobs until they were canceled. But we don't know what's going on. That's a terrible thing to say, I realize that. But that seems to be the way it is, like it or not. And I'm sure there are people in this audience who could enlighten us about that subject, but it won't, because it violates the rules. So I don't know.
I understand, pardon me, I understand not knowing what's going on, and I get that part of it, but in your opinion, can those magnetic systems be as powerful as the fusion systems? And could they possibly be significantly less?
Well, I think we're probably working on them because I was surprised at how many of the references I got to magnetoaerodynamics, which were classified. Who's doing that work? Where is it going on? And I couldn't read the reports. I could get a list.
I just wondered your opinion as a scientist, because I'm certain.
I think that there is some work going on. But remember, before you get a big program going, you got to find somebody in industry who's willing to push it. And I don't have a lot of faith in those guys in government being able to keep those things secret. They want to take credit in the next election, right? Look at all the jobs we brought to you. You've heard that song before. Yes?
How was the Voyager series, how were they propelled? Was that nuclear fusion?
I'm not hearing you.
How was the Voyager series propelled?
How was the Voyager series propelled? Oh, those are chemical rockets. They're coasting almost all the way. People have the idea that when you send a rocket somewhere, it's operating all the time. We go to the moon, what do we got, 25 minutes of rocket? And coast the rest of the way? That's not like you think of a high-performance vehicle. It's very different. Whole new ballgame. Yes? Wait, there's somebody.
When Tesla died, Nikola Tesla died, the federal government wasted no time swooping in and seizing his archive. What, if anything, do you know from your professional experience about the research Tesla was actually doing in Colorado Springs and elsewhere? And can his so-called free earth energy compete in terms of energy outputs with nuclear fusion or fission?
I didn't study Tesla. And I can't say, I don't have a definitive answer for you. I admire Tesla as a scientist who's never given the credit he deserved for alternating current and things like that. He's a brilliant man. So that's another one of these unknowns. I don't have an answer for you. Sorry. Yeah.
Stan, you believe in the MJ12 papers and the Eisenhower briefing documents.
The Eisenhower briefing document, at least 2 more documents. The rest are phonies.
Okay, well, how about the Reagan briefing document we heard about in Project 7? Do you believe in any of that?
It's in my gray basket at best. At best.
Very great.
I can't prove that there, it's very difficult to prove a negative. No, the government never did any work on this. Well, it means I haven't found any. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I'm still in the dark. Sorry. I mean, I don't know anybody who knows everything. The president doesn't have access to everything. It's probably a good thing. Sorry. Little politics on the side here. Any other questions? Yes.
When you say these projects that you guys worked on worked, and they were canceled, do you believe they were actually canceled, or did they go to some other agency?
I think they were actually canceled because there wasn't the will by a new bunch of guys running the show to continue them.
Okay.
Simple answer, I can't prove it. Sorry. Yes?
Your knowledge in nuclear fusion and fission, do you think they'll be able to find a way to put a stop to the pollution from Fukushima?
I don't think nuclear fusion will put a stop to Fukushima. I mean, after all, a reactor went, there was something exploded there, made a mess. But remember, the thing about radiation, one of the peculiar things, we have great sensitivity in our measurements. It's easy to measure radiation, but because you can measure it doesn't mean that it's lethal, that all radiation is bad. Some of you may have had cancer that was treated with radiation. Under proper controls, it's very useful for destroying cancers because you can put a lot of energy in a specific area without killing everything in the vicinity. So Fukushima was bad. Somebody goofed badly. Radiation was released. But I'm not worried about the long-term benefits unless you're putting people to make them stand in the most radioactive part of the ocean, which nobody is. Well, I don't think anybody is anyway. So, bad thing happened. Just the other day, an airplane crashed with 247 people on board. Do I think we should ground all airplanes? No, I think we need, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. You need to be careful. We, men and women, are fallible. You may have noticed that. Not all things get done properly. Things do happen. How many died in automobile accidents last year? Over 30,000 in the United States. And a larger number got injured. Nobody has suggested we get rid of all cars. How many people were killed by horses? I don't know. Other question. Yes?
You mentioned retiring, well, sort of. Do you have any plans for an autobiography?
I mentioned retiring. Do I have any plans for an autobiography? Good question. I might write a memoir. I like the notion of recording some of the aspects of my life that people don't know about. I was a busboy in the Catskills for 2 summers. I was a union waiter at a good hotel in Chicago for 3 years. I've done other stranger things than that, but I haven't worked it all out. I know I'm getting older and feebler. I still enjoy speaking. I'm still very interested in flying saucers because I think it deals with a larger question, man's place in the universe. And I think we need to stop being arrogant about how important and special we are. So I will continue to make my voice heard as far as I know. And I'm fortunate, genetically, both my parents lived to be 90. So I got at least 6 more years to go. So I hope I'll be able to do something useful. And I have agreed to speak in 2019 at the MUFON 50th Anniversary Symposium. Believe it or not, I spoke at the first one. So I broke my, I'm not retiring full time. How's that? Any other questions? Yes?
Those technologies that got canceled, were they safe? I mean, were they radioactive polluters or?
No, most of the technologies that get canceled because they're not doing what you want to do, or because somebody new says, well, that's not a good thing we should be doing. So all kinds of reasons. Do you know how much money the United States has spent on, quote, advanced research and development in the name of making us more powerful than the Russians? It's a huge amount of money. I mean, when I look back, $100 million on aircraft nuclear propulsion in 1958. That was a lot of dough. And who knows how many other programs. I know about that one because I worked on it. But so it's a strange world out there. And I'm not asking anybody to break security to tell us about all the black budget stuff they know about. Because if you know about it, you're not talking about it, not to me. Because then I come under that, and I don't need that. Okay, I'll be here, I was going to say at my booth. Well, it's not a booth, at a vendor's table tomorrow. And if any of you have seen my big green suitcase, let me know, will you? Thank you.